All right, so as you've noticed, Haley and I have been spending a lot of time in Quebec over the past few weeks, and I wanted to do a quick recap of the trip that we just went on. We had 8 days to ride a bunch of different locations and film at a bunch of different spots. So first of all, I want to give you a little insight on how these sponsor trips work. So we're working with the tourism board for Quebec City. And I want to make that distinction because Quebec is a province. Quebec City is a city within Quebec. So all of the destinations that we were riding were pretty close to Quebec City. We had Lumas, which was probably the furthest away. You have Mount St. Anne, which is like the second furthest away. And then you have Vallee, Empire 47, and Sante-Duman, which are basically a 30-minute drive from Quebec City, plus or minus. And I think that's what makes the riding there so compelling. I really like Quebec City because it's walkable. It has a great atmosphere. Having lived in Europe for a while, reminds me a lot of Europe. So when we were in the city, we ate at a really good restaurant called L'Origine. A little bit pricier than the normal restaurant I would go to, but when you're on vacation and you're looking to just have an experience where you don't have to think, it was fantastic. But you're probably not here for me talking about tourist destinations. You're probably here to talk about mountain bike stuff. And so, as I mentioned, we had about 8 days to hit up 5 different locations, and at each one of those locations, there's actually a bunch of different spots, or sometimes the networks are completely split up. Like, for example, at Vallee, there are 2 completely separate networks, and we only got to ride one of them. We're trying to fit a lot of stuff into a very few amount of days, so there's only so much that we can do. And on this trip, they asked us to bring our e-bikes. Now, e-bikes are not something that I ride that often. I do enjoy riding them, but they're not my primary bike. So we brought our e-bikes and another bike, which was a bike that I thought would be the most practical throughout the trip, and that was my GT Sensor. That's a trail bike, it's 150, 140, and it's just a very all-around useful bike. I could have taken either one of these bikes and been happy with it. All right, so let's talk about VBN. VBN is 2 completely separate networks within one name. You have the Shannon region, which is where all of the videos that you see online are from. And then you have the St. Raymond's section. That's where we were staying. One thing I'll say about all the places that we went to is they make the barrier to entry very, very small. It's really easy to get your ticket and get information about where you're supposed to go. I think Quebec riding in general has that pretty down to a science. It's very impressive, and I think a lot of networks can take note of that. But that does bring me to my first point is all of these places are pay to ride places. So you will need to buy a day pass. They're not that expensive, and it goes to supporting the trail building and trail maintenance at each one of these locations. So as I mentioned, we were primarily spending our time in the Shannon region. There are a few different kinds of rides that you can go on while there. You can go on the Nielsen's. It's essentially more of a scenic ride, a cross-country epic, if you will. I enjoyed it, but it's not the kind of ride that I would go on if I was on my own. It was a very enjoyable ride to be on in the moment, to do it with a group of friends, and I really enjoyed being guided by both Phil and Gabe. Gabe is from Mountain Bike Quebec, and he gave us a tour along with Phil, who's one of the trail builders over at VBN. We were on our e-bikes for that one ride because that was our first ride there, and it was going to be the longest, and to try to conserve our energy for the length of the whole trip, we elected to take our e-bikes for that particular ride, and I'm glad we did. I do think had I done it on a trail bike, I would have enjoyed that quite a bit, but I would have been completely gassed for the next day. But if you're to do like the 3 Nielsen's, you're looking at about a 50-kilometer ride, which I think comes out to approximately 35-ish miles, plus or minus. And it was a really fun ride, a lot of cool things to see, but again, it wasn't really a shred. The next day, we rode over at the other side, which is what they're calling the gravity sector. This is where you have Godzilla and probably one of the best built blue jump trails I have ever ridden. And I'm not saying that lightly. Octopus to Kraken, it's fantastic. It was super fun. Whether you're a beginner rider or an experienced rider, there are things to really enjoy about that trail. But Godzilla is actually one of the more interesting big jump trails I've ridden. It starts off relatively easy, and then as you go down the trail, it gets bigger and bigger until you get to the end, where a lot of those features really reminded me more of like a dirt merchant style, where if you hit the like big A-lines with kind of some extra credit landings, And it was actually kind of intimidating to hit blind. Luckily, I was following Austin, who was one of the primary builders for that trail, so I had some good beta following him. I didn't have to touch my brakes or anything. I just matched exactly what he did, and I thought that made for a really fun video. So something to take note is we shuttled that side, and anyone who buys a ticket to go to VBN can shuttle. That's included in your pass, but I would say if you're trying to shuttle it, the turning around areas is a little tight, but if you did not want to shuttle that, there's actually a climb that brings you to the same start. This is the start of the Nielsen East climb. So when you get to basically the top of that climb, you can either go right over to the gravity sector, or you can go left and continue on the Nielsen climb. Okay, so after we were done with the Godzilla shuttle lap, that's when we took a break. At the establishment, they don't really have a restaurant as of yet. They are building a new facility which will include a place to eat, but when we were there, they actually went out and got us subs from in town. If you're gonna be there all day, I probably would recommend doing that, but if you're looking for drinks, they do have some of that on site. I do want to mention they have a bike shop with a full rental fleet of e-bikes and basically everything you need to get your bike up and running. Do be warned, there is literally no cell service once you're on the trails, but luckily the establishment base area does have Wi-Fi. But once you're out on the trail, you gotta be self-sufficient. So then we rode Legend. Legend is the most iconic trail at VBN. It is the trail that runs right next to a waterfall, riverbed, whatever you want to call it. When we were there, it happened to be in a pretty dry spell, so you'll notice that there's not that much water flowing, but it's very unique. You're riding on granite rock that's really grippy. But I would say the section that you don't usually see is a section that's in the woods leading into it. That's actually more challenging and more fun in my opinion, but it's not as novel, so it doesn't do as well on social media, so that's probably why you haven't seen that as much. It's a pretty short ride, so you'll probably want to do that plus something else in the day. Before I forget, lodging in the area is, you have a lot of stuff available. You have the hotels in Saint-Raymond, you have van camping, you have RV camping, you have little shacks, little yurts you can rent out. They literally have the whole spectrum of different amenities a mountain biker would want to choose from. And the cool thing about VBN, it's more than just a riding destination. If you look at my Legend video, you'll notice there's a lot of people swimming, kayaking, tubing, canoeing. I don't exactly know how that's structured, but that's something you can do, and it looked very tempting while we were there because it was very muggy. Now, one thing I didn't really mention is we rode the Shanahan section, but we were staying over in Saint-Raymond, which actually had its own trail network, which we did not explore at all. However, we were staying at Le Roquemont, which is the hotel slash restaurant. It's kind of where a lot of people go congregate after they're done riding. It is exactly what you would want for a mountain bike destination. But then you also have the town of Saint-Raymond, which has a bunch of different restaurants and bars to choose from. We went to, I think it was a place called Le Mondial, which is open nice and late. So if you're a mountain biker and you get done your ride later in the evening, it will still be open. And the food there was, so that's all you need to know about Vallee du Nord. All right, so the next place that we went to is a place that Haley and I are very familiar with. That is Sante-Duman. This was actually supposed to be our third stop of the trip, but we got rained out on our second day. And by rained out, I mean we got a lot of rain. So every place in Quebec was closed. Instead, we just kind of laid low for that day. I didn't mind it after 2 days of pretty hard riding. I was starting to feel it already, and we still had 4 or 5 days left of the trip. So by the time we got to Sante-Duman, we were fresh, ready to go. And Sante-Duman, you can divide it up into 2 parts. You have, when you arrive at the Welcome Center, over on that side, you have the SDM Trails, which is kind of more of a bike park. You have one main climb that you'll do a bunch, and a bunch of different trails that all kind of circle back to the main climb. There are some cross-country trails mixed in, but I'm not as familiar with those. Most of the trails that I'm familiar with over on that side are more enduro trails. So you climb up and you have a downhill trail that brings you all the way back to the bottom, and then you climb up and do it again. Now, this is the first time that Haley and I have had a guide there. The two guides that we had were awesome. Both Guy and Sam are both trail builders in the area, and they do a lot of trail building with LB Cycle, who is the organization who does a lot of the big trail building projects over on the Maelstrom, on the SDM side, and stuff off-site. So it was great getting to know them and kind of hearing their stories, talking about some of the trail building aspects as we're riding along. So we were only at SDM for one day, so we were trying to fit in as much as possible. One of the things I really wanted to check out while I was there was a trail that had opened a week or two after we'd left the last time we were at SDM, called Mammoth. And this is a really cool North Shore inspired trail that is really technical. It's outside of my comfort zone. It's not something I do very often. Slower paced, technical, skinny, rock work, a lot more balancing skills, borderline trials riding, and it was really fun. I'm glad I got to do that. We went back up, we did a few more trails from that side, but the thing to take note of, that whole day, Haley and I, even though we climbed together, she was on a whole separate ride, because a lot of those trails, again, they kind of come back to the same spot. So if somebody is doing a double black, but the other person is feeling like doing a blue, or somebody wants to do a North Shore skinny trail and the other person just wants to do a technical downhill, you can go on separate rides or do separate things and then congregate at the bottom and climb back up together. And so that's exactly what we did, because Haley had some goals or things that she wanted to check off while she was there, and I had some things that I wanted to check off while we were there. So we both did a ride together, but we did separate trails, and it was really fun. And we ended that ride on a high note because she had checked off a rock roll that she wanted to do the previous year on LBC2.
Nice! That was great!
Now, after that ride, we went to what they call the Buvette, and this is, I think, one of the things that makes SDM such a great vacation spot is they have a facility that not only has a bike shop, it has a coffee shop, it has food, it has everything that you would want as a mountain biker, including showers to wash yourself off. I think that's something that's really overlooked at a lot of mountain bike destinations. So we took a break, we got some food. The food there is top notch, not just kind of fries and chicken wings, it's actual food that fills you up. Once we were done with that ride, we went and got shuttled up to do another ride on the Maelstrom side. And this is a trail that I'm really excited about because it's not open yet. So I can't really talk about it, but I will say this is a brand new trail. It is somewhere in between the stuff that you see on Mammoth, Magneto, and Wolverine, all kind of merged into one absolutely sick trail. And that will be the next video on this channel after this video is posted. But let me say, it is a freaking sick trail and I can't wait to show you that video. And both Guy and Sam talked me through the whole trail, showed me some things, and there are some things that were seriously impressive, but also intimidating about that trail. I can't wait to revisit that trail because when we rode it, it wasn't quite finished. But something to take note is if you ride the Maelstrom side, especially if you go over to the Slab City, the Wolverine side, is you have two options. You can either ride the road all the way back to the main Welcome Center, or you can climb back up Klondike, which is a fun trail to climb once, but you won't really want to do it more than once, or I wouldn't want to do it more than once. It's a big climb. It's not the worst climb I've ever done. For whatever reason, it's just very humid there, so I'm always just dripping sweat. And so by the time I'm done climbing it, I'm ready to take a break. I think one of the things that makes SDM so special are the trails and who builds the trails. The really cool stuff at SDM is built by LB Cycle. This is a nonprofit volunteer organization who do some impressive trail building. These people like to build trails. They really enjoy working with rock. They really enjoy building stuff that you just don't find in other places. The trail building there is absolutely fantastic. I think something that a lot of places can learn from, because they are building trails that mountain bikers want to come ride. These are really iconic trails. They ride well, they drain well, they hold up to the volume of people that come through. They're just very well built trails. Volunteers build trails that volunteers want to ride. And I'm not saying they don't bring in a paid trail crew for some things, but it has a very different vibe from other trail networks that you will ride throughout the area. But yeah, I would say SDM is definitely an S tier mountain bike destination. And with that in mind, let's jump into our next destination, which is Empire 47. All right, Empire 47. Empire 47 is just more commonly referred to as E47, was our third stop on this trip. It is only 20 minutes away approximately from SDM. Now, this time they put us up in a hotel that was literally right across from Empire 47. It was very, very convenient. E47 is probably one of the most overwhelming places to try to navigate. If you look at Trailforks, it's just a spaghetti network of trails. I would recommend, if you're trying to suss it out, go on Trailforks and look at, find a trail that you think you want to ride, and just look at a ride log to see how people navigated it, because that gave me a good indication of how we were going to try to navigate that place if we didn't have a guide. But we did have a guide, and in fact, we actually had shuttles. So we got shuttled up to the top of Summit 2, which is where Nosferatu and Descente du Coude start. Nosferatu is probably one of the coolest jump trails I have ridden. It's a trail that I saw on social media before riding there, and it's one of the very few trails that actually lived up to the expectations I had of it. I only got to do it once, and it was the time that you saw in the video, but luckily our guide Sandy, who was a great guide, gave us good beta on it as we're going down. I'm riding it blind, but he knew the trail, so essentially I was just kind of following his lead, and it worked out perfectly. And the trail is definitely one of those trails, if I were to have ridden it blind, I can definitely say there's probably one or two sections that would have caught me off guard, because the trail does some things that you don't expect it to, which is why it makes for such a good trail. It's not what you expect, and I love that. I really like when things do things that you don't expect and keep you on your toes. It was really fun. The second time we got shuttled back up, we did another trail, which was called Descente du Coude. So this is definitely more of what I would consider an enduro trail. It's a little bit more raw, a little bit less man-made, but definitely still incorporates a few man-made elements in the middle of the trail. I really liked it. It's one of the few trails throughout the trip that I wish I had a bigger bike on, such as the Force. That would have been the perfect bike for that trail, but overall, I felt like the Sensor was the right bike for Empire 47. There's only one little spot on Descente du Coude that I felt like I was really getting overwhelmed, and it was like 30 seconds long, but I definitely felt myself needing to slow it down because I was just getting bounced all around. And that kind of set the tone for E47. Normally, to get to those trails, you have about a 30-minute climb. And judging by the people who climbed up, it looked like a climb that you would want to do once, maybe twice, but you probably wouldn't want to do it 3 times. A lot of people who I saw riding those trails were actually doing it on e-bikes, and they're just kind of lapping it. So again, this would be another great place to ride on an e-bike, because you can just do a ton of laps there, and they actually have a special route for e-bikes to get to the top. The second part of the day, we rode from a different summit, Summit 2, and this had 2 really cool trails. The first of them was a trail that wasn't open when we were there, but we still got a chance to check it out, which is called Sepultura. This is a really unique trail where it's a jump trail, but all the sides of the jumps are cradled in rock. It's very, very aesthetically pleasing, very well built. It's fun. The trail builders obviously have put a ton of time and effort into that trail, and they really care what they're doing. It wasn't finished though when we rode there, so we didn't get a complete feel for it because it was soft and we weren't able to hit one of the features in the middle, which kind of threw off a little bit of the flow, but it wasn't too bad. All right, the last trail we rode from that summit, which was Valkyrie, which is probably the hardest trail there. They're saying, I don't know. All the trails that we rode were kind of the top hardest trails that they had there. And we were joined by another rider, Dan Boisvert, also known as Danner. So it was really cool to kind of talk to him, talk to Sandy, and then ride Haute Valkyrie, which is a trail that felt like almost should have been in BC because of the terrain that was on. For some reason, like all of a sudden in the middle, you're on these giant rock slabs that don't feel like should exist in those woods, and you're really high off the ground. So it just kind of like felt like you had transported to a different part of the world for a split second. The cool thing about E47 is there are those trails that we rode. There are tons of other trails that are more blue and green and family friendly. We rode a few of those earlier in the day to get a sense for the place, and they were super fun. Definitely more of a trail bike kind of place in my opinion. We were kind of doing a photo shoot for a local magazine, which is actually a really important magazine in Quebec called Racine, which is the Quebec equivalent of Free Hub. So if you're looking for information about mountain biking in Quebec, look up Racine. It's a great resource for information for places to ride, places to eat, and bike shops to go to. I think they do a great job with that. Now, one thing I think is missing from E47 is they do have food. They have like Powerades, they have granola bars and that kind of stuff. But if you're looking for like food, they don't have that. With that said, the riding there is fantastic and really fun. It's definitely a place that I would go to for the riding and fun aspect. Okay, with that in mind, that was Empire 47. Let's move on to the next place that we went to. All right, so our first stop was Mount St. Anne. This is a place that is pretty legendary in my world because as someone who grew up downhill racing and who's raced World Cups, Mount St. Anne has a reputation. I actually never got to race there, but it's a place that has always intimidated me, and maybe that's why I've kind of stayed away. So naturally, when we showed up to Mount St. Anne, and it had just rained, I was a little apprehensive. So when you show up to Mount St. Anne, you kind of show up to a big parking lot like you would at a normal resort. It's about 40 minutes removed from Quebec City. Once we parked, we met with Amelie, who is the marketing figure for Mount St. Anne. So she put us in touch with our guide, which was Frank. And I've actually raced downhill against Frank a long time ago, so it was cool to talk to him. I didn't know him when I was racing, but we had a lot of mutual respect for each other, which I think you can see in that video. In true Mount St. Anne fashion, on our drive up, it was raining. By the time we got off the lift at Mount St. Anne, it was absolutely downpouring. Like it was really coming down hard. So we kind of just waited at the top for a while, waited for the rain to subside, which it did. And we did our first laps down a green/blue trail, which is actually kind of the right experience that I wanted out of Mount St. Anne because it helps ease you into the terrain. And something to take note of, most of the trails at Mount St. Anne that people talk about are like the blacks and double blacks. These are like the sketchy, natural, techie downhill trails, but they have a whole network of greens and blues, and then they have a whole other network of enduro trails. But we only had one day at MSA, so we were trying to get the most bang for our buck and also showcased what the mountain wanted us to showcase and what they were trying to get out to the public, which is they want people to know that, hey, yes, we have those gnarly trails, we have a downhill race course, but we also have a lot of family friendly and blues and greens. And I will say the blue trails were actually pretty fun. And by the time we got down to the bottom, we learned that they actually closed off the trails because it had rained so heavily that some of the trails literally turned into rivers. But we were able to get a shuttle from Amelie all the way to the top of MSA, and which is pretty unique. I don't think many people get that kind of experience. And we got to do another lap of some trails that were a little bit more spicy. But because of the conditions, we decided to do something that wasn't super sketchy. So we didn't do some of the gnarly trails that you may have seen in other videos. We did portions of them and then skirted off to the side to connect to a different trail. Funny thing about that ride is I was psyched to get down to the very bottom, or almost the very bottom, without having dabbed a foot or anything the whole trip. And then the very last turn of the last trail, I slid out and my bike made a very loud noise smashing into a tree. As far as I could tell, the only damage to the bike at the time was the chainring that had gotten completely mangled. Easy fix. So I almost made it out of MSA unscathed, but that last 10 seconds of the run got me. One thing I do want to note about MSA, this is one of the very few places where I wish I had my Force. Again, I was trying to pick the right bike for the whole trip, but if I were to pick a bike for that specific destination, it would be the Force. They do have food. They have like a little food truck outside of the venue that you can get hot dogs and hamburgers and like a chicken sandwich, but it's not like you're not gonna get a meal that really fills you up. For dinner, we ended up going down the road to a brewery, exactly what a mountain biker was looking for, and all the other vehicles in the parking lot had bike racks on them. So it seems like a pretty popular spot for mountain bikers. So the last stop on our trip is Le Massif, or its full name, Le Massif de Charlevoix. I say the full name is because there is a Le Massif on the other side of the St. Lawrence River. It goes by the same name, but it's Le Massif du Sud. We went to Le Massif de Charlevoix, which is on the northern side of the river. Le Massif de Charlevoix is an interesting resort because you drive to the resort and you drive in at the top. That's where the welcome center is, that's where you get your ticket, and then you ride down and take the lift up. But where we were staying was actually at the bottom, so we actually drove up to the top and then back down around to the bottom, and that's where our condo was. And it was kind of a weird condo because it was a condo that slept like 8 people. It was a ski resort condo. It was really, really nice, but it was just Haley and I, and it felt a little bit weird, especially considering that we arrived at 7 o'clock, and by that time, everything in town was closed, so we weren't able to stock up with any food for the morning. So with that in mind, the riding there is bike parky, but it's more geared towards blue and green riders. There's a lot of blue and greens and like one double black trail. It's a very pretty bike park because the whole time you're descending, when you pop out in the open, you have this beautiful view of the St. Lawrence River. But when you're on the trails are very blue. One thing I do want to note is during that day, I discovered the shock on my bike was broken. And by that, I mean, I literally saw oil seeping out of the shock reservoir while I was on the lift, and I had no rebound and no compression damping. I just had a spring, but it was still really fun. We had 2 great guides. We had Trail Vision, which is composed of 2 different people. We had Sean and Guillaume, and they were great personalities to have on that portion of the trip. There's some trails that you have to climb up to get to, and I probably wouldn't have known that if it weren't for them. So one trail that we climbed up to get to had the steepest rock roll on the whole trail, and that's where I had the near crash that almost went viral. We had a lot of rain on our drive up to the venue, and they had just freshly rebuilt the dirt at the bottom of a rock roll. From the top it looked fine, but by the time I dropped in and got to it, my front wheel sunk in 6 inches into the mud, and I nearly went over the handlebars. If I had ridden just 6 inches to the left of where I had ridden, the dirt was firmly packed. Where I had ridden had obviously gotten saturated with mud, and it was freshly built dirt. Those things happened. It was a closed feature that we had permission to ride, so that's not something that was normal. It was just kind of a interesting situation that arose because of the conditions we rode it in. There was one trail that was definitely more of a challenge. It was called Le Gros Boeuf, and this is a trail that I really, really wish I had a functioning shock on, because it was very steep North Shore slabs with some skinny bridges with a thick rock slab in the middle. And I was trying to navigate that on my bike that had a blown out shock. But overall, I think they could really benefit from some more black and double black trails. As is, it's definitely geared towards a more leisure rider than myself or Haley. But that's, again, a personal opinion, and a lot of people really like it. So it really depends on what you're looking for. I will say, if you're looking for food, they do have food there, but it's kind of more of just like your typical canteen. We also didn't go to the restaurant, which is at the top of the venue. So this video is turning out to be way longer than I was expecting, but I still want to try to summarize my thought and give you my thoughts on how I would structure this trip if I were to do it on my own. Firstly, I would stay around Sante-Duman. Whether you get a cabin there or just off the side of the mountain, it's kind of the most centrally located place. You can do day trips to Empire 47, Mount St. Anne, or Le Massif. There's a reason why Quebec is a popular destination. I think it's well worthy of its reputation. It is fantastic. There's a reason why Haley and I go there. Got all the terrain and amenities that you're looking for when you're going on a mountain bike vacation. If there's any questions that you guys have, leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to as many as possible. Just want to give a big thanks to everyone who is involved in this trip. I had a fun time, and it made a big impression on us, and Haley and I will be back soon. So Peace out, Cub Scout.